What do you think as far as like if somebody wants to stay ahead of the curve, right? You're a builder that's building right now, like today's standard of homes, and you want to start implementing some of the like more low hanging fruit into your business. What do you think are some options for somebody, even if a client, right? A client's building a home, like what are some upgrades do you feel just don't add so much to the bottom line where it's like, yeah, you have to do this?
Yeah. It's interesting because I honestly have a terrible sense of what the baseline is.
Yeah.
So
All right. Well,
I'll
how
just
about if you like
caveat it a little bit, but
if you were building a house, um, what do you think that you would integrate into that house?
hmm
Like,
I
what
mean,
makes a good house for you?
I think, I think, aside from just general quality construction, things being put together well, air sealing is at the top of my list because air sealing coupled with proper ventilation. Let's just always say those things together for a while until people understand that that is
Yeah.
the case, right? Because you can't build a super airtight building and not ventilate it properly. It's about air control, right? I think that's one of the things that we talk about air tightness, but it's actually about air control, which is a more systemic approach, right? We're blocking the air from coming through the walls because buildings aren't frogs. They're not meant to breathe through their skin, and we're giving the house a set of lungs to breathe with, and we're controlling where the air comes in and how the air circulates and how it leaves, right? So I think that dynamic is absolutely top shelf. Like I'd rather have, you know, I want really good air control, I want good thermal control, good vapor control, good water control. But water control is a given. Bulk water, like flashing, has to be done right. And actually, I'm speaking of Ben Bogie. I was talking with him the other day, and he was talking about how like there's actually a pretty big gap in people flashing properly,
Yeah.
and that alone is concerning. So I
I
would
mean,
say at
that's
the
what I
very
see like
least,
the most. And that, like,
yeah,
when we talk tapes and sequencing, like
hmm
the flashing sequencing is what I
right,
feel is most lacking with people and what scares me the most as we progress into like, yeah, we really need to make sure that the water stays on the outside of this house and that
right,
it has a place to get out. Like to
yeah,
me, that's what's scary.
yep, yeah. I think if that is on the table, then that is the first priority. Like that has to be good. I don't care what kind of house you're building. You can build a leaky house. You still got to flash it properly
Yeah.
because no amount of passive ventilation through the walls is going to account for bulk water damage. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure we've all like repaired rotted windows, right? Like I walk into
Hmm.
buildings all the time. I see a little bit of bubbling paint on window trim and I'm like,
Yeah.
that wall's rotted around that window, right? Like, and you just see it everywhere. It
Hmm.
just jumps out at you. And those are leaky buildings, right? So clearly, leaky isn't going to save you there. So the flashing has to be good. And then I think the next step is air tightness. And, I think product can help here. I mean, certainly, like the products that we sell are really designed to make this as conducive as possible. They're airtight, they're rugged, they're robust. But you see a lot of, we've got the tape sheathing systems now for barriers, and that kind of allows people like to get into it a little bit more. I think we've seen an increase in air tightness just from those systems. But it's also things like, are you taping your sheathing, at the sill? Is that getting connected to the foundation, and are you blocking that? Because I think a lot of people don't realize that the air leakage at the sill is, if you have little 1/8 inch gaps the entire perimeter of your building,
Hmm.
imagine if those were gathered into a circle. That's a pretty big hole,
Yeah.
right? And that's like a pretty easy step that someone can take. It's one more added step if you're not doing it already, to just run that tape around that perimeter. It's probably a couple hours, for a modest size house.
Hmm.
And, I think it's things like that. So I try to take people through those types of steps. And then it's like, okay, is your subslab vapor barrier connected to your foundation or to the rest of your air barrier? That's another, and this is what I sort of mean by a little bit of tape. That's just another round of tape to make that connection. And now you don't have, people don't realize, I think, things like when you put pressures on a house and you get the stack effect where it turns the whole house effectively into a kind of chimney, it's going to suck air through the foundation, right? If it's got cracks, it will use them. So any place you can block those off you've got huge gains. And those are some of the common areas I see. And then beyond that, it's, if you're doing, a flange mounted window and you're leaving the bottom open, well, that means that that's an air gap. So what does that mean? You got to make sure it's well air sealed on the inside. I think tape's the best way to do that personally, but folks are caulking or whatever they're doing to make that seal happen. It's about sort of tracking where that air barrier goes. So I think all those little steps can add up to a lot, and skipping them can have, disastrous effects.
Yeah, they also, like, the tighter that you build something, the more forces there's going to be when you do have these gaps, right? Where it's like,
Right.
you have 100-year-old house that's leaking everywhere. You have a new house and you miss a detail, and it's like, yeah, that's going to be pulling through that area a lot.
I think the one other thing that I'll add is on the process side, which is the blower door. So if folks don't know what a blower door is, please go look it up, get used to it. It's going to be required everywhere eventually. But right now, I think the blower door is seen as a final exam. It's like the SAT of building the house. And we really encourage people to treat it as a diagnostic tool in the process. So before you put your drywall on, test your envelope, because that's the time to find those air leaks, not later, right? And so I think doing the blower door and also going around either with a smoke pen or infrared gun or something like that, it can sound like a lot, but in the total cost of a project, those are pretty minimal expenses for a massive gain. Like when we're talking about like, well, what happens if you suddenly have to tear a wall apart because you missed a leak, right? And that's keeping you from a CO and an air tightness code restriction. So I think it's things like that. I think it's looking at some of the most vulnerable areas and trying to hit those, and then from there it's things like increasing insulation. It's better and better building science from there. I mean, the ventilation thing is a key piece. If you're going to build airtight, you got to ventilate right, all that kind of stuff. But, like these habitat houses that I toured today, they are just basic, decent level houses and they're net zero. I mean, one of them had 4 solar panels on the roof and it's like 1,400 square feet, net zero. Like they're only paying the connection fee.
Yeah.
That's right. Cool. I mean, it's possible. So like, I think the big thing that I work with folks on is like, don't start with the, like, I can't do it. Right. Let's start with the question of how do we do it? And then let's go from there. And then we might have to make some compromise. I mean, I do that all the time. I'm always pushing the sort of gold standard or platinum standard of all this. And then we sort of dial it back depending on what the project scope is, right? You're not necessarily going to be able to do everything.